March 1919. 4 months after the armistice, a soldier sits in a makeshift barracks in occupied Germany, writing a letter home. The letter, preserved in a Midwestern state historical society, reads, "Dear Mother, you ask when I'm coming home. I wish I could tell you. The war ended in November, but they're still keeping us here. Occupation duty, they call it. Meanwhile, men in my unit are dying, not from German bullets, from influenza. Yesterday we buried 3 men. Last week, 5 more. The field hospital is overflowing. Some companies have lost more men to disease since the armistice than they lost in combat during the entire war. We survived the trenches only to die in a pandemic. Is this what victory looks like?" This letter represents a truth that American history deliberately erased. The armistice didn't end the soldiers' war. In many ways, it was just the beginning of their real struggle. In Part 1, we explored what American soldiers faced in combat, the industrial horror of trench warfare, the mechanized slaughter that shattered every romantic notion they'd carried to France, the psychological toll of modern warfare that left men permanently changed. But combat was only one war they fought. There were others, wars that don't appear in history textbooks. Wars that were systematically excluded from victory narratives because they complicated simple stories about American triumph, about heroic sacrifice, about making the world safe for democracy. American soldiers fought a war against racism within their own ranks. Over 350,000 African Americans fought with extraordinary courage, earned French decorations and American suspicion. They returned home hoping their service would advance equality. Instead, they returned to lynchings, riots, and the Red Summer of 1919. They fought a war against influenza, a pandemic that swept through military camps and troopships with devastating efficiency. More American soldiers died of disease than died in combat. But these deaths don't feature in monuments, don't receive medals, don't fit narratives that require heroic sacrifice rather than random viral tragedy. They fought a war of occupation, months of purposeless waiting in defeated Germany, watching morale crumble, discipline break down, men slowly disintegrating psychologically after the adrenaline and urgency of combat disappeared, leaving only boredom and the question, why are we still here? And finally, they fought the war of homecoming, returning to a nation that demanded they perform normalcy, while carrying trauma. Society refused to acknowledge that medicine couldn't treat, that families couldn't understand. These are the wars that history forgot, the experiences that were sealed away in letters, hidden in diaries, carried in silence until the men who lived them died. According to historian Jennifer Keane, the post-armistice experience of American soldiers reveals a systematic erasure of narratives that complicated triumphalist accounts of American intervention. The letters that survived tell these erased stories. This is Part 2. The War's History Erased. The American Expeditionary Forces arrive in France carrying more than weapons and supplies. They bring America's racial hierarchy with them, imposing Jim Crow segregation on the battlefields of Europe in ways that shock their French allies and embitter the African American soldiers who volunteer to fight for a nation that denies them basic citizenship. Over 350,000 African Americans serve in the Great War. The vast majority are assigned to labor battalions, digging trenches, unloading ships, burying the dead, the essential but inglorious work that keeps modern armies functioning. Only about 40,000 see combat, and they do so in segregated units, usually under white officers, often treated with suspicion by their own army. The letters from African American soldiers, collected by historians Arthur Barbeau and Florette Henry in The Unknown Soldiers, Black American Troops in World War I, reveal men navigating an impossible contradiction, fighting for democracy abroad while denied it at home, proving their manhood and citizenship through military service, while their own military treats them as inferior. Over 350,000 African Americans serve in the Great War. The vast majority are assigned to labor battalions, digging trenches, unloading ships, burying the dead, the essential but inglorious work that keeps modern armies functioning. Only about 40,000 see combat, and they do so in segregated units, usually under white officers, often treated with suspicion by their own army. The American Expeditionary Forces arrive in France carrying more than weapons and supplies. They bring America's racial hierarchy with them, imposing Jim Crow segregation on the battlefields of Europe in ways that shock their French allies and embitter the African American soldiers who volunteer to fight for a nation that denies them basic citizenship. One soldier writes with striking clarity, "We are fighting two wars. The first is against the Germans whom we face in the trenches alongside French troops who treat us as equals and soldiers. The second is against our own army's determination to prove that colored soldiers cannot fight, should not fight, will never be the equals of white soldiers. This second war is in some ways more exhausting than the first, because the Germans only want to kill us. Our own countrymen want to prove we're not fully human." The 369th Infantry Regiment, nicknamed the Harlem Hellfighters, becomes the most celebrated African American unit, serving 191 consecutive days in combat, longer than any other American unit. But their path to that distinction reveals the systemic racism they must overcome. According to Jeffrey Sammons and John Morrow's study Harlem's Rattlers and the Great War, when the 369th arrived in France, General Pershing's staff initially tried to assign them to labor battalions, despite their infantry training. Eventually they were assigned to the French army, not because American commanders believed they could fight, but because the French were desperate for troops and would take anyone. One account describes, "The French treat us like men, not colored men. Not special cases, just soldiers. We eat in the same mess halls, sleep in the same billets, fight in the same trenches. French officers judge us on our performance, not our skin color. French civilians invite us into their homes, their cafes, their lives." After a lifetime of American segregation, this basic human dignity feels revolutionary, but it also makes the poison back home more bitter. Now we know what equality feels like, which makes American inequality even harder to accept. How do you go back to Jim Crow after you've experienced a world without it? The French treatment of African American soldiers provides a stark contrast to American racial attitudes, and the letters reveal both the liberation and the bittersweetness of that experience. A soldier from the 369th writes, "When we arrived in France, they didn't know what to do with us. They didn't want colored soldiers in combat. Thought we'd panic under fire, run away, disgrace the American army. So they tried to make us stevedores. We protested. We trained as infantry, volunteered to fight. Eventually they gave us to the French, not because they thought we could fight, but because it solved their problem. That's how we ended up fighting under French command, wearing French helmets, using French weapons. The American army would rather give us away than let us fight as Americans." The combat performance of African American units becomes a battlefield in the propaganda war. White American officers circulate rumors of colored troops panicking, deserting, failing under pressure. The letters and official French military records reveal the truth. African American soldiers fight with extraordinary courage, earning French decorations, including the Croix de Guerre. Private Henry Johnson's actions in May 1918 would earn him France's highest military honor. Johnson and Private Needham Roberts fought off a German raiding party of approximately 20 men while on night patrol. Johnson, wounded multiple times, continued fighting with his rifle, his bolo knife, and ultimately his bare hands when his weapons were expended. The French awarded Johnson the Croix de Guerre with star. The American military barely acknowledged his heroism. One account notes, "The French gave me a medal. They called me brave, a credit to my regiment. The American army said nothing. Too many officers hoping we'd fail, hoping to prove their theories about colored soldiers correct. We had to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy." The interaction between African American soldiers and French civilians creates situations that horrify American military authorities. A secret document, discovered decades later in French military archives, shows that white American officers warned French commanders not to treat colored soldiers as equals, not to eat with them, not to shake their hands, not to invite them into homes, because doing so undermines American racial hierarchy. One soldier writes, "We can't just be good soldiers, we have to be perfect soldiers. When a white soldier makes a mistake, he's just a soldier who made a mistake. When a colored soldier makes the same mistake, suddenly it's proof that colored men can't fight. We carry the weight of the entire race on our shoulders every moment. It's exhausting. We're fighting Germans with rifles and our own countrymen with conduct. and we're expected to win both battles simultaneously, while pretending the second battle doesn't exist. The letters also reveal the peculiar burden African American soldiers carry. Every action reflects not just on themselves, but on their entire race. One soldier's account describes discovering this. We learned that our own army was telling the French to treat us as inferior, was trying to export Jim Crow to France. The French mostly ignored it. They judged us on how we fought, not on American racial theories. But knowing that American officers worked harder to keep us segregated than to help us fight, that burned. We're good enough to die for America, but not good enough to be treated as Americans. The casualty rates tell their own story. African American combat units suffer disproportionately high losses, not because they fight less effectively, but because they're often assigned to the most dangerous sectors, given less rest between engagements, provided with inferior equipment and support. Letters note, they send us to the hottest parts of the line and then act surprised when we take heavy casualties. They give us older French equipment while white units get the newest American weapons, then criticize our effectiveness. They rotate white units regularly, but leave us in the trenches for weeks beyond what any unit should endure, then point to our exhaustion as proof of inferiority. The mathematics of discrimination are subtle but deadly. One soldier writes in November 1918, "We defeated the Germans. We proved we can fight, proved we can serve with honor and courage. The French respect us. Other Allied soldiers respect us. But we're going home to America. We're proving ourselves in combat, won't change anything. We'll go back to the back of the bus, the colored section, the separate water fountains. Some of my fellow soldiers think our service will earn us respect, will advance the cause of equality. I'm not so optimistic. America doesn't want to believe colored men are equal. No amount of evidence will change minds determined not to see." The armistice brings victory, but not equality. African American soldiers know they're returning to a nation that will not honor their service, that will not extend the democracy they fought for to include them. The Red Summer of 1919, a wave of racist violence and massacres targeting African Americans in over 36 cities, proves this soldier's assessment correct. Returning African American veterans, many still in uniform, are lynched for the crime of wearing their uniforms with pride, for expecting that their service might earn them basic human dignity. According to historians, at least 10 African American veterans are lynched in 1919, some while still in uniform. The violence is calculated, designed to remind black veterans that military service changes nothing, that they remain subject to white supremacy, regardless of their sacrifices. The letters from African American soldiers reveal a truth that victory narratives erase. Military service didn't advance civil rights or demonstrate black citizenship in ways that white America chose to recognize. Instead, it created a generation of African American veterans who had glimpsed equality in France, demonstrated their capabilities in combat, and returned to an America determined to keep them subordinate. One account from 1920 captures the bitter aftermath. "We fought for democracy. We bled for America. We proved ourselves on battlefields in France. And we came home to lynch mobs, to riots, to white violence intended to remind us that military service changes nothing. Some of my brothers in arms are dead now, not killed by Germans, but killed by Americans who couldn't tolerate the sight of a colored man in uniform. We won the war abroad, but the war at home, that war continues. That war may never end." These are the letters that archivists often overlooked, that families sometimes destroyed rather than preserve painful truths, that didn't fit comfortable narratives about the good war that made the world safe for democracy, except for the black soldiers who helped win it. The trench warfare killed American soldiers by the thousands, but an invisible enemy killed even more: influenza. The 1918 flu pandemic, misleadingly called the Spanish flu because Spain, being neutral, was the only country whose press freely reported on it, sweeps through military camps and battlefields with devastating efficiency. By the time it burns out in 1919, it will kill an estimated 50 to 100 million people worldwide. More American soldiers will die of influenza than will die in combat. The official statistics are stark, Approximately 53,000 American combat deaths. Approximately 63,000 deaths from disease, most from influenza. But these numbers obscure the human experience documented in letters from the pandemic. Letters from soldiers reveal men facing an enemy they cannot see, cannot fight, cannot defeat with courage or training or tactics. One account from October 1918. The influenza has hit our camp harder than German artillery ever did. Men who were healthy yesterday are dead today, not wounded, dead. They get sick in the morning, develop high fever by afternoon, pneumonia by evening, and are dead by midnight. I've seen men drown in the fluids filling their lungs, seen them turn blue from lack of oxygen, seen them die coughing up blood. The hospital tents are overwhelmed. We're stacking bodies like cordwood because we can't bury them fast enough. This is worse than combat because at least in combat you can fight back. How do you fight a disease you can't see? The pandemic hits at the worst possible moment during the final offensives of the war, when hundreds of thousands of American troops are packed into camps, trenches, and transport ships. The conditions that make modern armies effective, concentration of troops, rapid movement of personnel, close quarters, also make them perfect vectors for disease transmission. Letters describe conditions in training camps. We sleep 60 men to a barracks that should hold 30. We drill in formation, eat in crowded mess halls, share everything. When one man gets sick, everyone gets sick. The medical staff tries to implement quarantines. But how do you quarantine an army that needs to function? We wear masks, gauze masks that probably do nothing but make us feel like we're doing something. Meanwhile, men drop like flies. Yesterday we had 5 deaths in my company alone. Not from combat, from influenza. The Germans don't have to shoot us. The flu is doing their job for them. The letters reveal the military's inadequate response to the pandemic. Medical facilities designed for combat casualties are overwhelmed by disease cases. Doctors and nurses trained to treat wounds are helpless against viral pneumonia. One medical officer writes, "We have no treatment. None. We can try to keep them hydrated, give them aspirin for fever, make them comfortable. But if the infection turns to pneumonia, which it usually does, we just watch them die. The mortality rate is horrifying. Healthy young men, soldiers in prime physical condition, dying within days of first symptoms. We're supposed to be healers, but we're just undertakers. We record deaths, fill out forms, send letters to families. The troop ships become floating death traps. Ships designed to transport troops across the Atlantic become plague ships, with influenza spreading through packed holds where men have no space to isolate, no way to escape infection. One account describes a voyage in autumn 1918. This ship is carrying 2,000 men, and half of them are sick. The holds smell like death. Vomit, fever, sweat, human waste from men, too sick to make it to the latrines. Men die every day. We commit their bodies to the sea with brief ceremonies that are becoming routine. The captain tries to maintain quarantine, tries to separate sick from healthy, but it's impossible. The virus doesn't respect barriers. By the time a man shows symptoms, he's already infected dozens of others. The letters reveal the cruel irony. Soldiers recognize they survived German bullets only to die from disease. One account, Johnson made it through Belleau Wood, through the Meuse Argonne, through 11 months of combat without a scratch. Yesterday he died of influenza, 23 years old. He dodged bullets and shells for a year, then got killed by a virus. There's no heroism in that death, no glory, no meaning. He just got sick and died. His family will receive the same telegram as families of men killed in combat, but somehow his death feels even more senseless. At least combat deaths have a narrative. Influenza deaths are just random. The pandemic also reveals the military's willingness to prioritize strategic objectives over soldier welfare. Even as influenza rips through camps, training continues. Even as ships become floating plague wards, troop movements continue. The war must go on. Letters note, they're still shipping troops to France, even though everyone knows the camps there are full of influenza. They're still drilling us in close formation, even though that maximizes disease spread. The generals say the war effort can't stop for influenza, that we have strategic objectives that must be met. but try telling that to the men dying in their bunks, drowning in their own lung fluid. The censorship system tries to suppress information about the pandemic. Military authorities fear that reporting widespread disease will harm morale, make recruitment more difficult, reveal American military weakness. The letters that make it past censors minimize the crisis. The private letters and diaries tell the truth. One diary entry: "We're forbidden to write home about the influenza epidemic. Censors strike out any mention of deaths from disease. The official line is that all casualties are combat-related, that American soldiers are healthy and strong. But I'm watching men die by the dozens, and their families will never know the truth. They'll think their sons died fighting Germans. They'll never know they died in a camp hospital, coughing up blood, begging for water." By the time the pandemic subsides in 1919, it has fundamentally altered the arithmetic of American sacrifice. Official records show that disease killed more American soldiers than combat, a fact that undermines narratives of heroic battlefield sacrifice. But the letters reveal that flu deaths rarely receive the same recognition, the same honor, the same memory as combat deaths. One account: "We hold ceremonies for men killed in action. We write eloquent letters to their families about honor and sacrifice. But for the men who died of influenza, we fill out forms, ship bodies home, move on. There are no medals for dying of disease. No one writes home about how bravely your son fought pneumonia. These deaths are just losses, not sacrifices." The pandemic also reveals disparities in who dies. African American soldiers, already assigned to inferior housing and provided with inadequate medical care, die of influenza at rates even higher than white troops. Labor battalions, housed in the worst facilities, suffer disproportionately. Letters from black soldiers note: "The flu hits colored soldiers harder because we're given the worst quarters, the least medical attention, the oldest facilities. When white soldiers get sick, they're evacuated to proper hospitals. When colored soldiers get sick, we're quarantined in our own units with minimal medical support. Even dying, we're segregated." The letters from the pandemic period reveal soldiers grappling with the randomness of death in ways combat almost allows them to avoid. In combat, soldiers can tell themselves that skill, courage, or luck determine survival. With influenza, there's no such comfort. One account: "At least in combat, you feel like you have some control. Stay low, move smart, watch for danger. Maybe these things increase your odds. But with influenza, you just wake up one morning, and you're sick, and all you can do is hope you're one of the ones who survives. It's Russian roulette, pure chance. That kind of randomness is more terrifying than combat." The armistice brings no end to the pandemic. Soldiers returning home carry influenza with them, spreading it to families, communities, entire cities. The victory celebrations become super spreader events. One letter from January 1919. "I survived the war. Survived combat, survived the flu in France, but I came home and gave influenza to my family. My father is dead now. My sister nearly died. I crossed an ocean, dodged bullets and shells, endured every horror France could throw at me, only to become the vector that brought death to my own home. They threw parades for us, welcomed us home as heroes. I carried a plague." November 11th, 1918. The guns fall silent. For millions of American soldiers, this should mark the end of their service, the beginning of their journey home. Instead, it marks the beginning of a different kind of endurance test, the occupation of Germany and the agonizingly slow demobilization. The letters from the post-armistice period reveal soldiers trapped in a strange limbo, no longer fighting, not yet home, existing in purposeless present, while desperate to return to the lives they left behind. One account from December 1918. "The fighting stopped, but we're still here. Still in uniform, still under military discipline, still in France or Germany. Why? The war is over. Germany is defeated. But the army says we have to occupy German territory, maintain order, enforce the armistice terms. So we march into Germany while our families wait at home, wondering when we're coming back." Approximately 200,000 American troops participate in the occupation of the Rhineland, the industrial heart of Germany, now under Allied control. They march into German cities expecting hostility or gratitude. Instead, they find exhaustion and resentment from a civilian population that has also suffered. Letters describe entering Germany. We marched through German towns expecting enemies. Instead, we found hungry people, exhausted people, defeated people. They watched us with expressions that mixed fear and resentment and weary acceptance. We're occupiers now, not liberators. It's a different role. In France, we were welcomed. We were there to help. In Germany, we're conquerors. The occupation duty itself consists largely of boredom punctuated by routine tasks. The letters reveal soldiers losing the sense of purpose that sustained them through combat. One account: what do we do all day? Drill, guard duty, patrols through German towns where nothing happens, equipment maintenance, inspections, all the tedious peacetime military routine, except now we've seen combat. Now we know what war actually is. And these make work tasks feel even more pointless. We're marking time, waiting for someone to decide when we can go home. The demobilization process is chaotic and seemingly arbitrary. Units that saw heavy combat remain in Europe, while some rear echelon units ship home quickly. The rationale seems opaque, fueling resentment. Letters note, they're sending some units home while we stay here. What determines the order? Combat service? Casualties? Time in theater? No one can tell us. It seems random. Units that never left supply depots are going home, while infantry units that fought through the Argonne sit here, occupying German villages. The letters reveal growing bitterness as weeks stretch into months. Men who endured combat with grim determination find their morale cracking during the endless waiting. February 1919. 4 months since the armistice. 4 months of waiting. I survived the war. I earned my ticket home. But here I am, still in Germany, still in uniform, still not home. My sister is getting married next month, and I won't be there. My father's health is declining. My sweetheart doesn't know how much longer she can wait. Every day I stay here, I lose more of the life I was supposed to return to. The interaction with German civilians creates complicated emotions. These are the enemy, but they're also just people, families trying to survive. Children who remind soldiers of siblings back home. One account, there's a German family living next to our billet. The father was killed in the war. The mother struggles to feed 3 children. Sometimes we give them food from our rations. Technically, we're not supposed to fraternize. But what are we supposed to do? Let children starve? These people aren't monsters. They're just people who lost a war. Some letters reveal soldiers questioning the entire enterprise. What exactly did they fight for? One account, we defeated Germany. We broke their military power. But what did we achieve? I read reports about the peace negotiations, and it sounds like the same old powers dividing spoils, drawing arbitrary borders. Where's the democracy we fought for? Sitting here in Germany, watching occupation drag on, I can't shake the feeling that we won the war without understanding what we were fighting for. The wait for transport home becomes its own ordeal. Ships that brought soldiers to Europe must now carry them back, but the process is slow, inefficient, seemingly endless. April 1919. They tell us we'll ship out next month. They told us that last month too, and the month before, we'll ship out when we ship out. And all we can do is wait. The waiting is harder than combat in some ways. In combat, you're engaged, focused on survival. This waiting is passive. You're just sitting here while time drains away. The letters also reveal discipline problems. Men go AWOL, show up drunk to formations, talk back to officers. The peacetime military rules feel ridiculous after combat. One account, discipline is breaking down. Men go AWOL, refuse orders. The officers enforce peacetime rules. Stand at attention, salute properly, maintain military bearing. But we're men who stormed machine gun nests, who survived artillery barrages. Now we're being written up for improper uniforms. The officers enforcing these rules weren't at Belleau Wood. They don't understand we can't just snap back to peacetime discipline. Finally, slowly, the demobilization accelerates. Units begin receiving orders to move to ports, to board ships, to return home. May 1919, aboard ship, we're finally sailing home, 7 months after the armistice. The crossing is different this time. No fear of submarines, no anxiety, just eagerness to be home, mixed with anxiety about what we'll find. Will we fit back into civilian life? Will our families recognize the men we've become? Will anyone understand what we experienced? The occupation and delayed demobilization don't feature prominently in victory narratives. History remembers the armistice, the parades, the homecoming. It forgets the months of waiting. But for the men who lived it, those months are inseparable from their war experience. Another trial to endure, another test of patience, another demonstration that military service means surrendering control until the institution decides it's done with you. The ships carrying American soldiers home dock at American ports throughout the summer and fall of 1919. Cities organize massive victory parades. Bands play, crowds cheer. Confetti falls like snow on men marching in formation. The letters written after homecoming reveal a profound disconnect between the celebration and the experience. One account from June 1919 writes, "They threw us a parade. Thousands of people cheering, waving flags, throwing flowers. The mayor made a speech about heroes and sacrifice. Everyone was so happy, so grateful, and I stood there in formation, smiling and waving, feeling absolutely nothing. They're celebrating something that didn't happen. Some clean, glorious war. That's not the war I experienced. But how do you tell that to people who are so happy?" The homecoming parties, the welcoming committees, the grateful relatives all create situations where soldiers must perform normalcy, must pretend to be the boys who left rather than the men who returned. One account states, "My family threw a dinner party. All the relatives came. Everyone wanted to hear war stories. Everyone expected me to be happy. I smiled, told sanitized stories, said everything was fine, but I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body, like I was an actor playing a role. They were celebrating someone who doesn't exist anymore. The boy who left in 1917. That boy died in France." The letters reveal the fundamental incommunicability of combat experience. Soldiers learn quickly that civilians don't want the truth, can't process the truth, will react with discomfort if told the truth. One account notes, "People ask what it was like. What do I tell them? That I watched friends die screaming. That I killed men whose faces I still see. That the smell of rotting flesh is still in my nose. I can't tell them that. So I tell them France was beautiful. The French people were grateful. We did our duty. I lie. And every lie increases the distance between who I am and who they think I am." Some soldiers try to tell the truth and face rejection. The home front has spent 2 years being fed propaganda. Returning soldiers who describe horror threaten that narrative. One account writes, "I tried to tell my brother the truth about the Argonne. He interrupted me. It couldn't have been that bad," he said. "We won the war." I realized then that he needs to believe in the mythology. The whole country does. They need to believe those deaths meant something. If I tell them the truth, that it was mechanized slaughter, that men died for yards of mud, then what? So I stopped trying. The letters reveal soldiers developing a protective silence, creating a wall between their war experience and their civilian lives. One account states, "I've learned to divide myself. There's the person I am at home, cheerful, normal, and there's the person I am inside, the one who saw things, did things, carries things that can never be shared. Only other veterans understand. When I run into fellows from my unit, we can talk, everyone else. I smile and tell them what they want to hear." The economic reality adds another layer of difficulty. The wartime economy collapses. Jobs are scarce. Veterans return to find their positions filled. One account, "I came home expecting some consideration for my service. Instead, I found my old job was gone. I tried to find work. Employers aren't interested in hiring veterans. My service record means nothing. The grateful nation thanked us with a parade and then forgot we exist." Veterans organizations formed to advocate for benefits. The American Legion, founded in 1919, tries to create community, but the letters reveal that even veteran organizations can't fully address the disconnection. One account writes, "I go to the Legion meetings. It helps to be around men who understand, but even there's a performance. We're supposed to be proud veterans, standing tall. Anyone who admits to struggling is seen as weak, so we maintain the facade, even with each other." The letters to Gold Star mothers, mothers whose sons died in the war, reveal soldiers providing comfort while concealing horrible truths. One letter to a dead comrade's mother notes, "Your son Robert was a brave soldier, respected by all, always cheerful. He died instantly when a shell hit our position. He felt no pain. You should be very proud." The same soldier's diary that day. "I wrote Mrs. Johnson about Robert. I told her he died instantly, felt no pain. The truth is, he was gutted by shrapnel and took 3 hours to die, screaming, crying for his mother. But how can I tell her that? So I lied. I gave her a clean death. She'll treasure my letter, and I'll carry the truth alone." The letters between veterans, men writing to comrades who understand, reveal a different truth. One letter to a fellow veteran, "I can't talk to anyone here about the war. My family wants the hero they imagined. My friends want adventure stories. But you were there. You know we survived by luck. That good men died randomly. That we did terrible things because we had to follow orders. When I write to you, I can be honest. You're the only person who knows the real me." The medical system is completely unprepared for psychological casualties. Shell shock victims receive minimal treatment, often based on theories that blame them for weakness. One doctor writes, "I see veterans in my practice, men with no physical wounds but who are clearly suffering. Nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks. The medical establishment has no framework for treating them. Some doctors accuse them of malingering. These men are dismissed, told to be men. So they suffer in silence." The letters reveal many veterans self-medicate with alcohol. One account from 1921 writes, "I drink too much. I know I do, but the drinking is the only thing that quiets the memories, that lets me sleep. Sober, I'm back in the trenches. Drunk, I can almost forget. I know it's destroying me. But the alternative, being fully present, carrying the full weight of memory, that's unbearable." Some veterans commit suicide. The letters mention it euphemistically, but the pattern is clear. One account states Patterson killed himself last week, put his service revolver in his mouth. Everyone acts surprised, but those of us who knew him aren't surprised. We saw the struggle, the way he was slowly being crushed by the gap between what he'd experienced and what he was supposed to be. He fought the war for 18 months. He fought coming home for 2 years, coming home one. The Bonus Army March of 1932, when 43,000 veterans march on Washington, demanding early payment of promised bonuses, only to be violently dispersed by federal troops, represents the culmination of broken promises. One veteran's account from 1932 notes, "We were promised bonuses for our service, but it's 1932, and we're in a depression. Men are starving. So we marched on Washington. We camped peacefully, made our case. And how did America respond? They sent the army to drive us out with tanks and tear gas. Douglas MacArthur, who commanded us in France, now commands troops attacking us. The government calls us agitators. We're just veterans who believed the promises." The letters from the 1920s and 1930s reveal a generation struggling to find meaning in their service. One account from 1925 writes, 7 years since the armistice. 7 years of trying to make sense of what we endured. The official histories are being written now, books about battles, heroic leadership, American triumph. None of them capture what it was actually like. Our letters sit in boxes unread. Our memories die with us. History will remember the generals. It will forget us. But some veterans refuse the silence. They write memoirs, give talks, try to ensure truth survives. One account from 1930 states, "I'm writing down my experiences, not for publication. No publisher would touch the truth, but for my children, for my grandchildren, so that someday someone might understand. I owe that to the men who didn't come home. The official histories lie. The monuments lie. Someone has to tell the truth." The letters reveal that veterans form bonds with each other that transcend normal friendship. One letter to a fellow veteran, 1928, writes, "I think of you and the other fellows often. You're the only people who really know me. Not the version I present to my family, but the actual me that was forged in France. When we're together, I don't have to explain. You understand the nightmares, the startling at loud noises, the inability to feel entirely present. In a strange way, those months in France are the most honest I've ever been." The letters also reveal veterans grappling with guilt, survivors' guilt, but also guilt about decisions made. One account from 1926 writes, "I think about the men I lost, the men under my command who died because of decisions I made. Could I have saved them if I'd done something different? I replay situations endlessly, imagining alternate choices. Rationally, I know I did the best I could, but rationality doesn't stop the guilt. I survived. They didn't. Why?" By the 1930s, a younger generation comes of age with no memory of the Great War. Veterans watch their experience being simplified, mythologized, turned into propaganda for the next war. One account from 1938, "War clouds are gathering again in Europe, and I watch young men being fed the same mythology we were fed. Honor, glory, duty. I want to tell them the truth. But they won't listen. We didn't listen to the Civil War veterans who tried to warn us. Each generation has to learn these lessons in blood. That might be the most depressing realization, that our suffering taught nothing." The letters from this period reveal aging veterans watching the world slide toward another war, helpless to prevent it. One account from 1939, "Europe is at war again. 20 years. That's all it took. Everything we fought for, everything we suffered to achieve. Meaningless. The war didn't end war. It didn't make the world safe for democracy. It just paused. Now another generation will learn what we learned, and 20 years after that, probably another war. This seems to be what humans do." The letters that form the foundation of this documentary nearly disappeared entirely. They weren't preserved in grand national archives as official records. They weren't published as important historical documents. Instead, they survived through accident, through decisions of families who couldn't quite bring themselves to throw away words their fathers, brothers, sons had written, even when reading those words proved too painful to bear. A box in an attic in Missouri, a trunk in a basement in Pennsylvania, a collection donated to a state historical society by descendants who never read them. Letters passed down through generations as artifacts whose content remained unknown, sealed away because the veterans who wrote them asked that they remain sealed, or because families who received them found the truth too devastating to confront. The archival resurrection of these letters, the slow process by which historians began locating, collecting, and analyzing these voices from the past, represents a fundamental shift in how we understand the Great War. For decades, the history of American involvement was written from the top down, generals and politicians' strategies and campaigns, national objectives and geopolitical outcomes. The voices of common soldiers, when included at all, were sanitized, selected for alignment with approved narratives, filtered through the lens of what comfortable history wanted to remember. But these letters tell a different story. Not the story of abstract strategy, but of concrete experience. Not the mythology of heroic sacrifice, but the reality of industrialized slaughter. Not the clean narrative of democratic crusade, but the messy truth of men caught in circumstances they didn't understand, asked to endure things no human should endure, sent home to a society that neither understood nor wanted to understand what they'd experienced. What do these letters reveal that official histories obscured? They reveal that American soldiers believed in their cause, most of them, most of the time, but belief didn't protect them from the grinding machinery of modern combat. They showed courage, extraordinary, sustained courage, but not the clean, uncomplicated heroism of propaganda. Their courage was the courage of endurance, of continuing to function while terrified, of following orders they knew might kill them, because the alternative was abandoning their comrades. They reveal that combat in the Great War was not primarily about fighting enemy soldiers, but about surviving an industrial process designed to destroy human beings. Artillery, machine guns, poison gas, These were the true enemies, impersonal and unstoppable. They reveal that the psychological casualties were as significant as the physical casualties, but almost completely unrecognized and untreated. Men came home carrying trauma that would haunt them for decades, for their entire lives. They reveal that victory brought no real resolution. The armistice stopped the killing but didn't heal the wounded, didn't restore the dead, didn't answer the question of what had been achieved. They reveal the systematic erasure of inconvenient truths. African American soldiers who fought with distinction found their service dismissed. Soldiers who died of disease rather than combat were forgotten. The occupation and demobilization disappeared from memory. The voices of common soldiers were excluded from histories written by officers and politicians. And they reveal the profound isolation of the returning veteran, the unbridgeable gap between civilian incomprehension and soldier experience, the performance of normalcy masking interior devastation. These are uncomfortable truths. They complicate simple narratives. They challenge the mythology of the war that made the world safe for democracy. They force recognition that patriotic service can coexist with trauma, that necessary wars still destroy those who fight them, that victory doesn't heal wounds or answer questions. This is why these letters were sealed away. This is why families couldn't read them. This is why archives didn't prioritize collecting them. This is why historians initially overlooked them. The truth was too painful, too complex, too threatening to comfortable stories nations tell themselves. But avoiding truth doesn't change it. It only ensures that future generations will make the same mistakes, will be fed the same comfortable lies, will march toward the same machinery of destruction, believing the same myths. The fundamental questions these letters pose remain unanswered because they're perhaps unanswerable. What is patriotism when it demands sacrifice that destroys those who serve? What is heroism in a war where survival depends more on luck than courage? What is victory when the cost in human suffering is so enormous that no geopolitical outcome can balance the scales? What do we owe soldiers when we send them to endure the unendurable and then expect them to return as if nothing happened? How do we remember honestly without dishonoring sacrifice? How do we honor sacrifice without perpetuating myths that encourage future sacrifice? These questions haunt the letters. They should haunt us still. The letters end not with answers but with images that linger. A sergeant in December 1918, writing that the war is over but he can't feel anything. A corporal in a 1919 parade, smiling while feeling like an imposter. A private in 1925, writing to a fellow veteran at 3 in the morning because he's the only person who understands. An old man in 1944, sealing letters away with instructions they should be opened after his death. These men are gone now. The last American veterans of the Great War died in the early 2000s. What remains are the letters, fragments of truth preserved against the tide of forgetting. History isn't what happened. History is what we choose to remember, what we choose to preserve, what we choose to teach. For decades, we chose to remember a simplified version of the Great War, a clear triumph of democracy over autocracy, of American vigor revitalizing exhausted Europe. The letters reveal that reality was far more complex, far more painful, far more human. They remind us that wars are fought by individual human beings who endure experiences that mark them forever, who make impossible choices under impossible circumstances, who come home changed in ways their society doesn't want to acknowledge. These are the letters we almost lost. These are the voices we almost silenced. These are the truths we almost allowed to die. But they survived. Not in grand archives, not in official histories, but in boxes in attics, preserved by families who knew, somehow, that these words mattered even if they couldn't bear to read them. Now, more than a century later, we can read them. We can listen to what American soldiers actually experienced, in words as close to their own as the historical record allows. What do we do with this knowledge? Perhaps simply this: to remember honestly, to teach honestly, to ensure that when we send young men and women to war, we do so with clear eyes about what we're asking them to endure. The letters offer no easy answers. They don't tell us whether the Great War was justified or whether American intervention was necessary. But they remind us that those who fight wars pay a price that extends far beyond the battlefield, that lasts far longer than the conflict, that affects not just them but their families, their communities, the entire trajectory of their lives. They deserve our honesty in return for their sacrifice. One soldier, writing in 1920, perhaps said it best. Someday someone will ask what it was really like. Not the sanitized version, not the patriotic mythology, but the actual truth. Will anyone tell them? I've written it down, everything, the unvarnished truth. Maybe someday it will matter. Maybe someday someone will care about the reality, rather than the myth. Or maybe not, but at least I'll have tried. At least the truth will exist, even if no one wants to hear it. The truth exists. The letters are the evidence. Now we have a choice. Do we listen? Do we grapple with the uncomfortable complexity they reveal? Do we allow them to challenge our narratives about war and heroism and sacrifice? Or do we seal them away again, where they won't disturb our preferred stories? History provides no answers. It only provides the voices, the truth. What we do with that truth, that's up to us.